show up and make them stop. Wanna know my name so badly, knows that I'ma change the game.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Chillcast with Anna and Yayo. I am one of the hosts, Anna, founder of Perenna, and today I'm super excited to invite a good friend, James, who is the co-founder of Jambo, and also now you're an advisor at Sharps Technology, currently the largest live Solana DAT, right?
Yes. Nice to meet everyone. Thanks for having me, Anna. I'm the strategic advisor to Sharps Technology, the current largest Solana Digital Asset Treasury, the largest public equity raise, 400 mil plus last week of gross aggregate proceeds up to 1 billion.
Really good for the Solana ecosystem. I've been a DAT advocate of more than that ever since I understood the concept. So I'm really excited to learn more. So first of all, can you walk us through what the process is like from Sharps? You injected $400 million worth of assets into the company, and what happens next?
Awesome. Yes. So the process is we essentially identified Sharps Technology, a medical distribution company on the NASDAQ, and we had plans with the management that are very aligned to essentially run the new Solana Digital Asset Treasury strategy moving forward, and took many months of going through management, etc. Not to get into too many details, but in a transaction like this, you don't actually have a merger and a change of control, etc. For these pipe raises, which is why you can continuously, in a lot of ways, raise continuous capital. So you really need to be aligned with the management team. So, I'm super excited to be a strategic advisor to the treasury deployment efficiency, even as well as the raise. So what happened is, as of last week, we raised north of 400 mil of equity. We've since then bought all of that into Solana. We currently hold over 2 million of Solana, SolanaStrategicReserve.org can be seen. And we essentially filed our ATM earlier this week as well. All ATM is an at-the-market facility, giving us the ability to sell shares, get cash, and continuously buy that into Solana to increase a very simple metric of Solana per share that you would own.
Yeah, let's talk about the warrant structuring and what are investors buying into, and then I'd love to dig into like the market impact of Solana and the ecosystem. So for every single DAT comes usually with warrants, and that's what incentivizes the shell company and also the management team, including you guys, to act to incentivize to perform. So can you talk about, like, for example, I think DFDV or UPEXI have some milestone-based warrants. What is the warrant structure like now? And as investor warrants also are exercised, do teams get additional warrants, or else you would face like dilution, or you might face like change of control? Maybe not change of control, but definitely affects your ownership stake in the company.
Yeah, no, great question. So essentially, if you look at the warrant structuring, it's usually around what the initial lock-in price is. So the overview is STSS, currently traded on the NASDAQ. We locked in investors in the pipe round at $6.50 a share. Now, everyone has one-to-one stapled warrants at a 50% premium strike price, meaning at $9.75, with exactly 50% premium, you can exercise your warrants after your shares are registered, which everyone gets registered at the same time. It's usually a 30-60-day review period by the SEC from when you deal it upon closing. So for us, we structured the same way as we've leaned on Cantor, which is our lead placement agent that structured the same warrants for the BNB vehicle and multiple other vehicles before. And we thought it was very advantageous to capture more fundraising ability and cash coming in, because if these warrants are all exercised, essentially we're raising over $1 billion of aggregate gross proceeds. So that would make it up to $1 billion, up to a lot more into our treasury vehicle early on, especially as we're probably going to discuss in this pod, other treasury vehicles coming out with more buy pressure on Solana. We believe a rising tide lifts all ships as well, but we want to be locked in at the price of Solana that we want to. So this is a lot of the reasoning why we had the warrant structured early on for both the investors and the team. Now, on the strategic advisor side, we also have warrants structured in, and basically this is up to shareholder approval. So it's not as vanilla as everyone thinks. It's just, hey, you're structuring these warrants and they're done. So you actually have all shareholders vote on it within an X amount of time period before you can actually get warrants. You have to hit certain KPIs as a strategic advisor in the deployment of the treasury strategy with your asset managers we're working with. For example, Verify, Monarch, and Pantera, best in class. A lot of it is tied in with the general overview of the deal and how you're actually trying to accumulate the SOL efficiently moving forward.
So for the listeners here, if you're considering holding SOL versus investing into a DAT and not financial advice, and we may or may not hold positions here. Right now, if you hold spot SOL and say SOL is at 200, your one-to-one exposure is SOL. But when you go into STSS, if you hold $200 worth of STSS, your exposure to SOL would be much higher or lower?
Well, it would be lower. So if you have a MNAV, so one-to-one MNAV would be you'll buy one Solana, you own one Solana. So
Yep.
say there's 400 million raise that we do. If every dollar was going into Solana, it will be exactly one-to-one. But because there are bankers fees, transaction fees, doing the management company, incentivization warrants, it comes out slightly higher. For us, our MNAV fully diluted basis was still 1x in the pipe round to all investors. Now, I think the simpler and way investors potentially should look at it, not financial advice, full disclaimers, is say you buy one share of STSS as of last Monday when we announced. As of next Monday, we hope we can increase the Solana per share that you're holding by a drastic amount. And that would be by us increasing the rate of Solana in which we are buying to our share. So this is the whole point, in my opinion, of actually setting up a digital asset treasury, is providing a public vehicle for investors to actually access the underlying asset. Because maybe me and you, we can buy Solana directly, spot, Coinbase, custody, etc. But for many institutions and funds, they're not set up to directly hold the underlying digital asset. They have to invest in potential other public structured vehicles. Now for Bitcoin, Ethereum, there are 43 and 21 ETFs respectively. Solana, there are multiple pending, which many folks are very advantageous and think that it was going to go through very soon. So with this thinking, ETFs potentially coming out soon. With these treasury vehicle story, very simple. You're accumulating a lot of Solana with institutional flows. You're essentially bridging traditional markets to digital assets. And usually these are frameworks that investors in those public equities think about. And one of them could be revenue. And if you look at why we even chose Solana as the underlying asset, Solana's did 900 million of revenue last quarter, right? That is just pure revenue, hard fact numbers. Even if you don't want to look at wallets of 4 million daily active wallets, or 9 billion of transactions last quarter, you can look at straight revenue numbers and still come down to an asset class you might want to invest in. And then for certain other benefits like tax, where it is a tax deductible, or owning a stock versus doing on an asset, you might choose to do this public vehicle versus just owning the underlying asset.
Totally agree. I think this is a good point to transition into the long-term thrive and survival of DATs, because the point here is very obvious that indeed majority of TradFi institution capital cannot directly access digital assets. But let's say 10 years from now, many of them now have infrastructure to access cryptocurrencies directly. Do you think the structural advantage of DATs will hold? And if so, how will the DATs evolve, and how will Sharps and you guys evolve with that?
I think the most important, to be honest, is a lot of macro, even looking at how all the markets trade very stringently today. And theoretically, right, this trade works because if your stock price is going down, you should be able to sell your underlying asset. Like we should be able to sell Solana and buy back more of our shares. That will give shareholders, like to Sharps shareholders, a lot more confidence that, you can sustain a floor price, you can sell the underlying asset, you're very nimble, even as a public market vehicle. And then when your stock is ripping, you can capture that value and volatility and cash, and then buy that into your SOL. Now, in 10 years, first of all, I don't know how many DATs there will be around, because in capital markets, you're in the largest consolidate and buy out the others and win. And you can see that sort of forming out in Ethereum, where there's one that captures 70% of the volume, there's another that captures 30%. And they're both at about, I think, 1.5% of total ETH and about 0.5%, which would essentially be very hard to eclipse, moving forward for anyone that launched, no matter how big of an early private round you do. So I think for moving forward for Solana, in 10 years, I can't give any price predictions or anything, but obviously as a strategic advisor to Sharps and personally being a Solana co-founder for multiple years, just bullish on the chain and everything happening in general. So if macro is trending upwards and we do all of our structuring and vehicles right, we should be holding, 3 to 5% of Solana, in the near term future. And that's a lot more things that you can do, because to get to a 1 billion company, you need essentially a pipe, right, in the private round. To get to a 10 bill company, you need an ATM. You look at what BitMine did is they raised 2 billion ATM. We just filed our ATM after the concurrent pipe previously. And to get to a 100 billion company, the potential is filing another 20 bill ATM or having structured products. You can directly have a convo with a MicroStrategy with your bank and say, what do your users want to have, and structure the converts and the bonds around it.
Yeah, I think so for listeners, not having enough size means you can't structure attractive converts, which puts you in a much worse advantage versus the largest player in the market. Tell me more about your team. Who is part of the management team? Who's running the Solana strategy? And maybe a bit about yourself.
For sure. So the CEO is Paul, who's from the existing management team, very well versed, has run public markets, a CEO for quite a long time in multiple venues. Obviously not the most Solana native, but has since then adopted and learned very quickly and believes in the strategy, quite a bit of accumulation. So we're very happy on alignment. Alice Zhang is the chief investment officer, the CIO, who is actually my sister as well. So we're both ethnically Chinese, grew up in Africa, 3 generations, both in New York. And I graduated, I actually joined her multifamily office to start the entire crypto fund in my career before Jambo that we co-founded together as well, building the mobile part of crypto. But yes, essentially she's the chief investment officer, comes from a capital markets background, ran a multifamily office, 600 mil AUM, have been an entrepreneur for decades. Myself, Jambo and Solana, we've been at most of the break points, speaking, sponsoring, doing things, and really aligned with Solana ecosystem. In fact, we've partnered with multiple projects in the eco as well, like Jupiter, etc. So very excited to sort of bring this more to the public market, because really is a different lingo where, maybe not all crypto native metrics to look at, but essentially paint a broader picture, right? Like say 10 years ago, you buy gold in Nvidia, you log off to better than everyone. Well, today Bitcoin's digital gold, Solana is that digital infrastructure that might power bringing the internet capital markets on chain.
I know you guys have some formidable competitors coming that publicly announced last week. How are you guys positioning yourselves? Competitor is not the right for me. It's actually a frenemy. It's a frenemy because, like you said, rising tide raises all boats. It's especially true in your case, but they also take attention away, but also to your category. So it's an interesting relationship. How are you guys planning on differentiating?
I think if you want to look at the rising tide of all ships, just look at what's happening in Ethereum, an asset class that's been around 11 years, Solana's 5 years, and has a bunch of ETFs approved that actually through the bear understand how contrarian of a bet Ethereum was, and the sentiment that was around it. Well, that has completely 180 turned, revitalized, stable coins, Genius Act, all beneficiary to Ethereum. And a huge part of that was a key figurehead on public market TV, speaking to a lot of retail investors in ways that they can understand and trust, and shaping that narrative and bringing the flows. So I think similarly for Solana is going to be super important, and to have, like you said, formidable, huge guys coming out in the near-term future, I think them speaking through their distribution channels and factors will honestly do well for everyone, not just Solana, but also raise awareness for digital asset treasuries of Solana in the public markets. So that being said, I would love to see sort of how the structurings of those will be and how they acquire their Solana, right? I'm happy to share how we've thought about it and how we're doing it, but I think everyone is different, seen from various vehicles.
Can you share how you're acquiring Sol?
Most definitely. So 2 parts to this. Number 1 is we did take in-kind SOL contributions, and I want to share why we view this in a very positive light. So we did about 65% cash, 35% raise in-kind of Solana. And the reason is the cash will be used to acquire as low cost Solana creatively as possible. So we were able to lock in a bunch of that already early on in the private round. We're very happy with, to not only not move markets publicly when we buy, but also have a lower entry price at the time. It was very advantageous about a week and a half ago. Second is using the cash. We're obviously working with best-in-class asset manager, Pantera, Monarch, and Verify. So a lot on the open market, but it's not just one rip order buy. It's a lot more stagnated and trying to buy and not move as much. But obviously there's a huge time pressure, because you want to signal to the market, look, this management team is keyed in on one execution strategy, and that's for accumulating your SOL in the most efficient way and increase your Solana per share. Well, you can't do a huge cash raise and then not accumulate Solana and say, hey, I might just start thinking about doing something else with this. So you want to instill investor confidence that you're very I wouldn't say just aggressive, but efficiently deploying that capital into Solana. So that's what we've done in the past week before filing our ATM.
Yeah, the speed to market is, I think you guys are one of the fastest ones within, let's say, a week and a half to 2 weeks time purchasing, deploying our capital. How are you thinking about, is there a, not to talk about price, but is there a macro, are there a set of macro signals where you would become cautious to deploy further?
A lot of the macro signals, honestly, was a week and a half ago when Powell at Fox in Jacksonville, spoke to rate cuts, etc. I think everyone's paying attention to very similar signals, and you don't know how the market is going to react in any way, whether it's priced in or not. So for us, we can only hope to stick to our strategy and accumulate, and that's why I think a long-term view is honestly very important here. Otherwise, the short-term factors is just a lot at the moment. And I've been in the industry since 2017 and multiple cycles. I say this very humbly. I've never seen such great news and string of events, right? The entire C-suite, US, the Treasury Secretary, nation states are printing money to essentially stack up in digital assets. And you see every financial advisor like Vanguard, Fidelity, BlackRock's IB ETF did more flows than S&P 500. The writing's on the wall, but the sentiment is still kind of low. And I think maybe this is a prolonged cycle, as folks have talked about it. Maybe some are a bit jaded from other cycles. So for us, it's hard to pay attention to short-term macro signals. There's a lot better for us to look at long-term accumulation strategy, but obviously pair that with potential short-term macro signals.
Coming back to Solana, what are some funny, surprising and maybe amusing misconceptions that institutional investors had about Solana that you encountered during your pipe raise? How do you dissipate FUD around Solana having a huge overhang on the locked and the staking emissions? I'd imagine you got asked this question many times. So
great question, and the answer is, to be honest, I did not.
No?
In the pipe round, private investors, they were actually very educated on Solana. There was not a lot of questions just grilling me on purely Solana. There was a lot more grilling me on the structure and our management team and me as a strategic advisor of, can we deliver on the goals that we say we can? Because truthfully, a lot of the investors and ours that believed in the thesis might be a lot earlier to meet in Solana, like Rockaway X, right? One of the first investors in it. No need for me to explain. So I think it's essentially when you're communicating, it's a lot more on your actual management team as you as a strategic advisor and how the company is moving forward, because you could be early to Bitcoin or be late to Bitcoin, but be early to MicroStrategy, right? And you see the analogy I'm getting to is, it is a whole other beast. So for us, that communication is very different to mainstream media.
Where do you think the challenges of getting additional buyers, or who are your target future shareholders, and how do you plan on increasing your shareholder base?
I think everyone that is trading on Robinhood, everyone that watches, the traditional news outlets, I think we're going beyond the echo chambers of crypto, right? But I don't think it's a very worrisome trajectory. Bitcoin 17 years old, Ethereum's 11 years old, Solana is 5 years old. Bitcoin has 43 ETFs, Ethereum has 21, Solana has multiple pending approval. I think it comes with time and getting out of the echo chambers. And I think as the metrics will be seen more and more, because as time progresses, you can only get more quantitative and get more granular on exactly where the flows is, where the liquidity is. I truly believe that great talent is coming into digital assets. And when they come to digital assets, they're deploying a protocol, they're most likely looking at Solana, because that's where the liquidity and the users are. And the top 3 apps like Pump, Photon, Axiom that generated, quickest to 100 mil revenue are all on Solana. So potentially one app on Solana does more revenue than other chains. So I think that opportunity cost is very apparent. So for us, the new net buyers of Solana, we're trying to get out to the actual retail that would buy stocks and consider Solana maybe a pairing with Tesla or another stock out there. Not financial advice, but just essentially thinking of it as a holistic portfolio versus just as a cryptocurrency asset.
How do you think about memeability?
I think it's been misconcepted. It's a misconception for public retail, where Solana, even as a consumer chain, in my opinion, is not the best branding, because people think, oh, meme coins is on Solana and all that. But what does meme coin and consumer chain even mean? It means when you open your iPhone, the actual apps on your phone might be Phantom Wallet, Dex Screener, it might be actual Solana apps, Jupiter app, mobile backpack exchange that you can really use, and a low transaction cost. if that's what it means, then I'm all for it. I just see a lot of misconception around, meme coins and money and all of that, which obviously a lot of there will always be bad actors in every casino, but it's the infrastructure that is actually there. So I think memeability is like super important for anything to go viral. And honestly, it's a term for crypto, right? Bitcoin is memeable. It makes you feel part of a tribe and something different, right? It's obvious it's the biggest wealth transfer, digital transfer in this century. So it just makes sense to go to the chain that has actually that infrastructure to scale.
For sure. For what it's worth, I answered Blockworks' stat question on that. And then after I answered it, I changed my view on I think at first it's easy to, when traditional investors ask this question, it's like, oh, Solana is not really a meme coin chain, didn't want to lean into the meme side of things. But over time, I realized memes are a super powerful tool for influencing people and getting reach. So I think as much as Solana is viewed as the infrastructure for consumer, for some of these viral things, that part of memes doesn't have to one-to-one equate to all the bad actors or some of the bad actors and actions that are happening on chain. And as an ecosystem, we can lean into the good side and the positive side of touching consumers and moving them to trying new things. Anything else you want to share with our listeners?
To be honest, I think we got through a lot of it, because I don't want to share on staking and XYZ. Everyone, the listeners already understands this. I think to public retail, I try to stress a lot that Ethereum, even if you don't go into a lot more detailed stuff, just vanilla 7% staking is already an amazing multiples of earnings revenue for $1 billion companies for earnings calls every quarter. But yeah, obviously for crypto native folks, we don't understand that.
Yeah, our audience is pretty crypto native. Cool, yeah, then we can wrap up here. Thank you, James, so much for coming to Chillcast, for being an amazing guest. We wish you all the best on various TV appearances. Yeah, hope to see you guys around in the Solana ecosystem.
I will work hard for everyone's holdings of Solana.
Thank you for coming on.
在此提醒大家，所有内容均不构成投资建议，都是我跟瑶瑶作为行业知识研究的产出，还有嘉宾的言论也是他们的个人言论，希望大家做自己的研究。
道路千万条，安全第一条，做自己的研究，让我们增强知识，然后在链上开心玩耍。欢迎关注安娜和瑶瑶 Talk， 然后我们会有更多行业一线前沿的资讯跟大家进行分享。非常感谢。